Good morning, Sumner families. It's Miss Rinko Smith, our reading specialist again at Sumner. And today I've chosen the book If You Lived at the Time of the Civil War by Kay Moore and illustrated by Annie Matzik. And I chose this book because our fifth graders are reading and learning about the Civil War. Looking at the table of contents, you will notice that a lot of our sections are comparing and contrasting the northern and the southern ideas and life and lifestyles. I chose to read the sections on how home life may have changed because of the war in both the North and the South. So our first part, did your home life in the North change because of the war? The kind of life that you led before the war continued. People still farmed in the country. In the cities, there were a large number of factories and businesses. If your family owned a farm or a business, it may have made more money by selling food, clothing, and weapons to the army. You would have lived in a big house and enjoyed parties and dances. You could buy fancy food and special clothes. Favorite children's clothes looked like army uniforms. 8-year-old Tad Lincoln had a small-sized colonel's uniform, and other children had Zouave jackets, a colorful soldier's uniform. For many in the North, the push to supply the soldiers during the war helped them to get rich. If your family didn't have much money or worked for someone else, the war did make your hard life worse. With higher prices for food and housing and often lower wages, everyone in the family had to work even harder to get money to live. Women took jobs when men left to fight. You always thought and worried about your family if they were in the army, but the fighting was going on far away, and it did not make your life very different. Did your home life in the South change because of the war? Life was very different than before the war. Most of the battles were fought in the South. There were Union ships blockading the southern coastal towns. Everyday items could not be gotten. You had to make do with things that you had, and you used items in many different ways. Cloth was made by spinning and knitting homespun wool. Neatly cut thorns became sewing pins. Dried persimmon seeds were made into buttons. Plants and vegetables were used for dyes. Onion skins make things a brownish-orange color, and carrot tops turned items greenish-yellow. Patchwork clothes and quilts were used in all houses. When the feet wore out of a pair of socks, the tops were carefully unwoven and the thread twisted on a spinning wheel and then knitted into new stockings or gloves. Hats were made by weaving corn husks, palmetto leaves, or other grasses. With the men away at war, life changed. If you had chores before the war, you had more now. Even very young children had chores to do, from planting and weeding the garden to washing dishes. If you lived in a large plantation home, your life stayed almost the same while the slaves stayed. House slaves helped with cooking, cleaning, and washing. Field slaves planted a garden and tended the crops. But as the Union Army moved through the South, many slaves left with them or refused to work for the family anymore. For slaves, the war was an opportunity to escape to the North. Southern women and children had to provide for themselves, something they were not used to doing. So what was life like in the North? What was life like in the South? Whose life changed or was impacted more?